I'm Flavia Zimmermann from the Australian Institute of International Affairs in Western Australia, and today we have with us Emma Tunne Wakpi from the Sir Walter School of Public Policy and International Relations. She has over 13 years experience in social policy and development, and we are going to be discussing today development in Papua New Guinea and Melanesia. Thank you for being with us, Emma.
Thank you for having me.
Emma, can you please explain to us the main political forces and actors in Papua New Guinea and how it impacts current developmental policies in the country?
Okay. Yes, the main political factors or forces in Papua New Guinea at the moment is the PNG government. It has been in power for the last 10 years. It's the only party that's had consistent, consecutive terms in Parliament. Prior to that, we have never had a government since our independence in 1975 see through a term. We've always had votes of no confidences in governments changing and shifting, and the development plans not being seen through because of different party politics. But this one government now has been consistent over nearly 10-15 years, and because of that they have been able to implement certain party politics and try to have consistency within service delivery. But having said that, there is some issues with the government as well. We have hardly any opposition, so government can pass a lot of laws on their own and change a lot of things and run a lot of decisions past Parliament that really the opposition has no strength to query or argue against, and so that's kind of the downside to the government that we have. Other political forces, actors, the relationship that we've had with the churches, the history of PNG as a country and how it's developed and been run. Prior to 1975, in the colonial days, it was the Australian government that was administering Papua New Guinea. Prior to that, it was the British government. And as they were doing that, a lot of the development work was done hand in hand with Australian administrators, young Australian administrators, young men that were sent to the country, hand in hand with missionary workers in PNG. And because of the geography of the country and how the country was, a lot of the work that's being done right in the rural remote areas is being done by churches who have established health centers and schools, primary schools, and then from there then the government comes in and helps to bring look at the secondary schools, tertiary institutions and so forth. So those would be the two main actors, and I think Australia government, just because of our ties and the historical ties and the relationship that we've had, the Australian government is a huge partner in PNG politics, PNG development work, and PNG is actually the largest recipient of Australian aid, and how that works through Australia has a very close interest in PNG, how it works with its development and how it works with the government to implement the government plans.
Thank you so much, Emma. And Emma, can you please explain to us the impact that globalization has had in PNG, and particularly the life of the poor?
Okay. I would say not much, just because 85% of our population are rural remote. So anything that happens in the capital city, and nothing really impacts the rural remote people. They are subsistence farmers, living from day to day off their land. The only real major change I can say that has impacted poor people would be the introduction of mobile phones. We've had a private telecommunication company come in for the first time into our country, and they started putting towers up all over the country, and so the mobile phone has actually impacted a lot of rural remote development. But apart from that, there's not much else services that gets to the majority of our population. People in the urban and peri-urban city centers, they see all the developments. We have a lot of resource boom, a lot of mining companies coming and going out, logging companies coming and going out. But everything that happens around that area is centered in the main city. The services do not flow out, and so people are still living very basic lives in the villages, literally in huts, no power, no water, just how their ancestors used to live. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. And you're just mentioning the important role that the Australian government plays at delivering aid to Papua New Guinea. Can you please just expand a little bit more to us to which extent the current aid programs are really delivering, and in which ways we could reshape them and make sure that aid is really reaching the ones who need assistance?
I think for the last 10, 15 years now, having worked with PNG since independence and with the various different governments and coming through, Australia has realized what works and what does not work in PNG, and the PNG context and the cultural ways of doing development and understanding development. And so in the last 10 years or so, it's done a really great job. We have a lot of public service failures. We have a lot of institutional and political corruption. And so as much as Australia wants to strengthen the systems of service delivery, it realizes that it can't really work with the mechanisms sometimes, and so it's formed its own arm of development. It has a development arm, DFAT, and DFAT actually contracts out Australian-based organizations to carry out various development works, from construction to health to education in various places. And so these development arms then really scrutinize different NGOs, local-based companies, different players within the development sector, and follow up with them to see, the government has its priorities. It's signed on to the Millennium Development Goals, now the Sustainable Development Goals. So it looks at the country. The country has a 2050 vision and a plan. And so working with the government, working with the relevant provincial authorities and the local level government authorities, it does then prioritize the government targets and then looks at what services the NGOs, faith-based organizations, or other local entities are wanting to deliver to the rural remote areas. It is very concerned about rural remote, gender, governance, and so it then works with them from the start to the end to see how they deliver the services to the rural remote people. So it has a very good influence on them. But yeah, just a more understanding, I think. If there's one area I would talk about, it's more understanding of the logistics of service delivery. A lot of development work are interested in the implementation and the result, but I think 90% of the costs in service delivery in PNG, 70 to 90% is in the logistics of getting the materials and the people out there, then to be able to implement the projects and the programs. So that would be one area I would really look at. Yeah.
Very interesting, Emma. Yeah. And just wrapping up our interview, recently we had elections in PNG, and I would like to ask you, Emma, to which extent do you think PNG is finally transitioning to full democratic system, and what would you suggest to really steer the country into the direction of full popular representation?
Yeah, about that, I think we all read a lot and seen a lot about the democratic representation of how elections are carried out in PNG. There really was no democratic elections per se. Within the cities and the towns, I would say yes, elections were carried out okay, at least in a transparent manner. But when you get out into the more rural, remote areas, again, it's the cultural aspect of how people think about leadership and power, and how they vote. And so in Australia, for example, you vote according to parties. So whoever the individual is, what party they represent and the party policies, you vote for the party policies. Whereas in PNG, when you go to the village areas, you don't vote for the party or the policy, you vote for your tribesmen. You vote for whoever it is in your tribe that you put forward. So people are still thinking in tribal terms, and so they would talk amongst themselves and put forward a person from the tribe which they would like to vote for, because they then see that as the person that will represent them and trying to bring services into their areas. And so it's very tribal. And so when they decide on the vote, the people then have decided that this is a person we'll vote for. They then don't really participate in the voting. And it's not democratic in that sense then, because when the people bring the ballot papers to be marked off, only a few mark it off, and not all would be voting. Not everyone every individual will be voting, but it's the consensus of the village that's voting. Some don't see that as being democratic, and it's against the law, our constitutional law, but it's been allowed to play out, and it hasn't been criticized as heavily as I thought it would be. And I'm not sure if the reason is because of the whole cultural context and the connotations behind that. But it's something that needs to be explored and examined, and maybe assessed and look at how people vote, because if that's the way it's going, then freedom, and because people in the village, it's not about individual freedom, it's about community presence and community support. So how do you find a balance between that and work towards finding a form of democracy that suits, globalization is happening. We talk about individual freedom, we talk about the individual right, but then you have pockets in our country where it's about communal living and communal rights. So how does the country then work and massage that to suit its needs and its people's needs? And because, again, 85% of our people are illiterate, not educated in the village, how do we move them forward into a system that they don't even understand, the democratic system? And so how do you work with that and help them to understand that as well? It's a huge challenge. It's not easy, but I think we could have done it better. It really did lack. Our elections this year around were one of the worst elections we've had, I think, personally. So it wasn't free, it wasn't fair, but it's done, and people have accepted it and they've tried to move forward. There are a lot of court cases still pending about the results of the elections, and we'll see how that goes forward. Yes.
Thank you so much for talking to us today, Emma.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us, and for more information, please visit our website www.internationalaffairs.org.au. Thank you.
Thank you.